The most terrifying countdown of my life didn't begin with a ticking clock. It began with an email. I was 42 minutes away from going live to an audience of nearly 12 million people when my phone vibrated against the glass surface of my dressing room table. First, I ignored it. People sent me messages every minute of every day. That was the price of spending 27 years in front of cameras. Viewers wanted advice. Producers wanted favors. Reporters wanted quotes. But something about this notification made my stomach tighten before I even opened it. Maybe it was the subject line. Maybe it was instinct. Either way, I tapped the screen. The email contained only a photograph and a single sentence beneath it. The photograph showed me standing on a quiet beach at sunset. My arm was around Claire Bennett. Her head rested against my shoulder. We were both smiling. Not the practice smiles I use for magazine covers or television interviews. Real smiles. The kind that appear when you forget the world is watching. Under the photo were 7 words. You have 72 hours to comply. I stared at the screen so long that my reflection appeared in the black border around the image. My blue eyes looked older than they had that morning. My hands felt cold despite the bright studio lights surrounding the mirror. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Not because someone had discovered us. Deep down I think I always knew that day might come. No, what terrified me was the realization that whoever sent this knew exactly which photograph would hurt the most. Out of 6 years of memories, they had chosen one of my favorites. Claire and I had taken that trip to the Oregon coast after one of the hardest years of my life. No assistants. No security team. No interviews. Just the two of us walking along the shoreline while the Pacific wind tangled her blonde hair and made her laugh whenever she tried to fix it. It was supposed to be private. Safe. Ours. Yet somehow it was sitting in my inbox. A knock sounded at the dressing room door. 5 minutes, Victoria, my producer called. I locked the phone and forced myself to answer. I'll be right there. My voice sounded normal, calm, professional. Decades of broadcasting had taught me how to hide panic better than most people hide excitement. The email stayed on my mind throughout the entire broadcast. Every camera lens felt different that night. Every red recording light looked brighter. Millions of viewers watched me deliver headlines, conduct interviews, and smile on cue. None of them knew that my world had shifted less than an hour earlier. None of them knew that the woman they trusted every evening was carrying a secret large enough to destroy everything she had spent her life building. After the show ended, I sat alone in my office overlooking downtown Chicago. Rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights blurred into gold streaks across the glass. I opened the email again. This time there was a second attachment. A document. 3 pages long. The sender knew where Claire lived. They knew where I worked. They knew details that should have been impossible to find. At the bottom of the final page was another message. 72 hours. Then the world learns the truth. I checked the timestamp. 71 hours and 18 minutes remained. And for the first time in 6 years, I wondered if keeping Claire a secret had been the biggest mistake of my life. The truth was that Claire Bennett entered my life long before she became something worth threatening me over. 6 years earlier, I was standing beneath the crystal chandeliers of a charity gala at the Art Institute of Chicago, smiling so much that my cheeks ached. The ballroom shimmered with polished marble, expensive perfume, and carefully rehearsed conversations. Everyone wanted something from someone. Donations, connections, publicity. It was the kind of event I attended 3 times a month and forgot 3 days later. At least that was what I expected. I had just finished posing for photographs when I escaped to a quieter hallway overlooking the museum gardens. The evening air drifted through an open terrace door, carrying the scent of fresh rain and spring flowers. For the first time all night I could hear myself think. That was when I noticed her. She was standing alone near a photography exhibit, studying a black and white image of Lake Michigan during a winter storm. Most guests glanced at the artwork for 2 seconds before returning to networking. She looked as though she had forgotten the gala even existed. I remember being curious before I was interested. Her blonde hair rested loosely against her shoulders, and she wore a navy dress that seemed chosen for comfort rather than attention. There was something calm about her. Something genuine. I found myself walking toward the display without fully deciding to do it. "Beautiful shot," I said, stopping beside her. She glanced at me, then back at the photograph. It is, she replied. Most people see the storm first. I always notice the lighthouse. Her voice was warm and thoughtful. Not nervous. Not impressed. Just honest. I looked at the image again. She was right. The lighthouse stood near the edge of the frame, almost hidden by waves and clouds. Somehow I had missed it. You are a photographer? I asked. She smiled. Guilty. Then she pointed toward a small plaque beneath the picture. That one is mine. I felt unexpectedly embarrassed. I had spent 2 minutes complimenting her work without realizing she created it. She laughed softly when she noticed my reaction. Do not worry. It happens all the time. We talked for 15 minutes. Then 30. Then nearly an hour. About photography, travel, books, Chicago winters, places we wanted to visit. The strange thing was how easy it felt. My entire career revolved around conversation, yet most of them followed predictable scripts. With Claire, every answer led somewhere unexpected. Every question felt real. When an event coordinator finally found me, she looked relieved. Victoria, they have been searching everywhere for you. Claire stepped back immediately. The moment broke. Reality returned. Cameras, schedules, responsibilities, the familiar machinery of my life. I should get back, I said. Of course, she replied. Then she hesitated. It was nice talking to someone who actually looked at the photographs. I laughed. It was nice talking to someone who made me notice a lighthouse. As I walked away, I expected that to be the end of it. One pleasant conversation. One memorable stranger. But later that night, while scrolling through photographs from the event, I stopped when I found a candid image someone had taken near the exhibit. Claire and I were standing side by side, smiling at something neither of us could remember. For reasons I could not explain, I saved the picture instead of deleting it. Looking back now, I think a part of me already knew that meeting her was the beginning of everything. Over the next few weeks, Claire became a quiet presence in my life, appearing just often enough to make me wonder when I would see her again. It started with a thank you email about the charity gala, then a conversation about an upcoming photography exhibit, then a recommendation for a bookstore she thought I would enjoy. None of it felt unusual. At least that was what I told myself. The truth was that I began looking for her name the way some people look for sunlight after a long winter. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself standing outside a small gallery on the north side of Chicago, because Claire had invited me to view a new collection she was presenting. Rain drizzled softly against the sidewalk, turning the city streets silver beneath the gray sky. I almost turned around twice before walking inside. My schedule was packed. I had interviews to prepare for and meetings waiting on Monday morning. Yet somehow I had driven nearly 30 minutes across the city for a photography exhibit. Claire spotted me almost immediately. Her face brightened in a way that made the crowded room disappear. You came, she said. You sound surprised. She laughed. I was not sure someone as busy as Victoria Hayes would spend her Saturday looking at pictures. These are not just pictures. The words escaped before I could stop them. Her smile widened. We spent the next 2 hours walking through the gallery. She explained the stories behind each photograph. Small coastal towns. Forgotten diners along Route 66. Sunrises captured from mountain ridges after waking before dawn. Listening to her talk about her work felt different from listening to most people discuss their careers. There was no performance. No self-promotion. Just genuine passion. I found myself telling her things I rarely shared with anyone. How exhausting public life could be. How lonely hotel rooms felt after events. How strange it was to have millions of people recognize my face, while very few knew the real person behind it. Claire listened without interrupting, without judging, without trying to fix anything. When the exhibit ended, neither of us seemed eager to leave. We ended up at a small coffee shop nearby. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, the scent of roasted coffee and cinnamon filled the warm air. Hours passed without either of us noticing. At one point, Claire glanced at the clock and laughed. I think we have been talking for almost 4 hours. That cannot be right. She checked her phone. It is definitely right. I felt something unfamiliar settle inside me. Comfort. The kind that arrives when you stop monitoring every word before you speak it. As we stepped outside later that evening, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected across damp pavement like scattered gold. Claire pulled her coat tighter against the cool air. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. Neither of us seemed ready to say goodnight. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down and sighed. I should go. Yes, I said, even though I did not want to. She smiled softly. I am glad you came today. So am I. As I watched her disappear into the evening crowd, a realization settled heavily in my chest. What began as curiosity had quietly become something far more dangerous. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow because of a specific person. And that thought stayed with me all the way home. The problem with keeping something precious hidden is that eventually the hiding becomes part of who you are. Looking back, I cannot point to a single day when Claire and I decided to keep our relationship private. It happened gradually, one small choice at a time. A quiet dinner in a neighborhood where nobody recognized me. A weekend trip booked under separate reservations. Photographs stored in private folders instead of displayed on walls. First it felt practical. My career had been built on public trust. Every interview, every endorsement, every contract depended on maintaining a carefully managed image. Claire understood that better than anyone. She never asked me to explain. She never pressured me to make announcements or declarations. If anything, she protected my privacy more fiercely than I did. That was one of the many reasons I fell in love with her. 3 years after we met, we rented a small cottage along the Oregon coast for a week. No cameras. No producers. No schedules. Just endless stretches of beach and the sound of waves rolling against the shore. On the third evening, we sat outside wrapped in blankets watching the sun sink into the Pacific Ocean. The air smelled like salt and cedar. Seagulls drifted above the water while distant fishing boats moved across the horizon. Claire rested her head against my shoulder and said something that has stayed with me ever since. Do you ever get tired? She asked quietly. Of what? Being who everyone expects you to be. I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Sometimes. She nodded as though she already knew the answer. I wish people could see you the way I do. Those words settled deep inside me. Not because they were dramatic. Not because they were romantic. Because they were true. Claire knew the version of me that existed when the cameras disappeared. The woman who worried too much. The woman who ordered pancakes for dinner when she was stressed. The woman who still called her older brother whenever something went wrong. She knew all the ordinary pieces nobody else ever saw. Yet even then, I could not bring myself to imagine sharing our life with the world. The stakes felt too high. Every year my audience grew. Every year my visibility increased. And every year the secret became heavier. Back in the present, I sat alone in my office staring at the threatening email for what felt like the 100th time. Rain continued tapping against the windows. My city glittered beneath the darkness, unaware that my entire future seemed balanced on a countdown clock. 71 hours had become 68. Time was moving whether I was ready or not. My phone buzzed. Claire. Just seeing her name made my chest tighten. I answered immediately. Hey, she said warmly. You sound tired. For a moment I closed my eyes and listened to her voice. Part of me wanted to tell her everything right then. About the email. About the photographs. About the countdown. But fear stopped me. Fear had been making decisions for me for years. Long day, I replied. You should get some rest. I will. There was a pause. Victoria. Yes. Whatever is bothering you, you do not have to carry it alone. After we hung up, I stared at the city lights below and felt something I had not allowed myself to feel since the first email arrived. Guilt. Because the person I was trying hardest to protect was also the person I was keeping in the dark. The next morning I woke after barely 3 hours of sleep. The countdown now showed 63 hours remaining. I had read the threatening messages so many times that I could practically recite them from memory. Every detail felt deliberate. Every sentence felt calculated. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how to keep me off balance. They did not ask for money. They did not make outrageous demands. Instead, they focused on one thing: fear. That realization bothered me more than anything else. Most strangers wanted something tangible. This person seemed to want control. I arrived at the studio before sunrise. The hallways were unusually quiet, filled only with the distant hum of equipment and the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the employee lounge. Normally the building felt familiar, almost comforting. That morning every face looked different. Every greeting carried new meaning. I found myself studying people I had trusted for years. Had someone noticed more than I realized? Had someone followed me? Had someone been watching for a long time? The questions followed me through every meeting. During a production conference, I caught myself staring at Mark Reynolds, my executive producer. We had worked together for nearly 12 years. He knew my schedule better than most members of my family. He knew where I traveled, which hotels I preferred, which events I attended. If anyone had enough information to connect pieces of my private life, it was him. The thought made my stomach tighten. Then I immediately felt guilty for even considering it. Mark had been loyal for over a decade. Yet fear has a way of turning certainty into suspicion. Around noon another message arrived. My pulse jumped the instant my phone vibrated. This time there was no photograph. Only a single sentence. Trust is a dangerous thing, Victoria. I stared at those words for several seconds. Then I slowly looked around my office. The timing felt impossible. Almost as if whoever sent the message knew exactly what I had been thinking. My hands trembled slightly as I locked the screen. For the first time, I wondered whether the threat was closer than I imagined. That evening, I attended a network dinner with executives, sponsors, and advertisers. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across the room while conversations blended into a constant murmur of polite laughter. I should have been focused on business. Instead, I found myself searching every face for clues. Across the room, Mark was speaking with two senior executives. Nearby, my longtime publicist, Denise Harper, checked messages on her phone. Denise had protected my career through scandals, rumors, and endless media speculation. She knew how fiercely I guarded my private life. Suddenly I realized something unsettling. So did several other people. Over the years, a small circle had gained access to pieces of information that might seem meaningless on their own. Flight records, hotel reservations, last-minute schedule changes. None of it looked suspicious individually. Together, however, they painted a picture. As the dinner continued, I excused myself and stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the Chicago River. The night air felt cool against my skin. Boats moved slowly through the dark water below while city lights shimmered in the distance. For a few moments I simply stood there breathing. Then my phone rang. Claire. I answered immediately. Hearing her voice usually calmed me. This time it made my chest ache. You seem distracted lately, she said gently. Is everything okay? I opened my mouth to reassure her, to tell another easy lie. Instead, I hesitated. Somewhere in the city, someone was counting down the hours until my life changed forever. And for the first time, I began to suspect that the threat was not coming from a stranger at all. The countdown reached 48 hours just after sunrise. I knew because I had been awake watching the numbers change on my phone screen. Sleep had become almost impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw photographs, emails, and unanswered questions. By mid-morning, I finally made a decision I should have made days earlier. I called a private cybersecurity consultant the network occasionally used during major data breaches. His name was Ethan Cole, and he had spent years tracking anonymous online threats. We met in a discreet office several blocks away from the studio. Rain clouds hung low over Chicago, turning the city skyline into a blur of steel and gray. Ethan reviewed every message, every attachment, every timestamp. For nearly an hour he said very little. The silence made me increasingly nervous. Finally he leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. The sender is good, he admitted. Very good. My stomach dropped. Can you find them? He hesitated. Maybe. But there is something else you should know. He rotated his laptop toward me. Several pieces of information filled the screen. Travel records, public appearances, event schedules. Most of it looked ordinary. Then I noticed a pattern. Whoever had gathered information about Claire and me had not done it recently. Some of the data stretched back years. How long? I asked quietly. Ethan looked at me carefully. At least 3 years. Possibly longer. The room suddenly felt smaller. 3 years. Someone had been collecting details of my private life for 3 years without making contact. That was not opportunistic. That was deliberate. On my drive back to the studio, my phone rang. Mark Reynolds. I almost ignored it. Almost. Victoria, he said. You missed the editorial briefing this morning. I had an appointment. You okay? His concern sounded genuine. Too genuine. I hated myself for questioning it. Just tired. Well, get some rest. We need you sharp for next week's election coverage. After we hung up, I found myself replaying every conversation we had shared over the past decade. Every canceled dinner. Every sudden schedule change. Every moment when he seemed to know exactly where I was supposed to be. By late afternoon, another message arrived. This one contained no threats. No countdown. Just a photograph. Claire stood outside her photography studio carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was smiling at someone outside the frame. My heart stopped for a second. The image had clearly been taken within the last 24 hours. Whoever was behind this was not relying on old information anymore. They were still watching. My hand shook as I immediately called Claire. She answered on the second ring. Victoria. Where are you? I asked. At the studio. Why? Relief washed through me when I heard her voice. Are you alone? There was a brief pause. Yes. Victoria, what is going on? I stared out the office window at the river below. For several long seconds I considered telling her everything. Then I heard another voice in the background. A man speaking nearby. Claire turned away from the phone to answer him. The conversation lasted only a few seconds, but something about it caught my attention. Who was that? I asked. Just someone from the building maintenance team, she replied. They were checking security cameras. Security cameras. The words echoed in my mind long after the call ended, because suddenly a possibility occurred to me that I had not considered before. What if the person I suspected was completely innocent? What if I had been looking in the wrong direction the entire time? 29 hours remained when everything finally began to make sense. Not because I discovered the person responsible. Not because the messages stopped. The truth emerged because of a mistake. A small one. The kind people make when they become too confident. Ethan called me shortly after 7 in the morning. I was standing in my kitchen staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold when his name appeared on my phone. The moment I answered, I heard something different in his voice. Focus. I found a connection, he said. My heart immediately accelerated. To who? There was a pause. Not who. How? 20 minutes later I sat across from him, while he pointed to a series of timestamps displayed on his laptop screen. Every message, every photograph, every attachment had passed through multiple anonymous servers. That part was expected. What caught his attention was something much smaller. Several files had been opened from the same physical location before being transmitted elsewhere. Can you identify the location? I asked. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes. He rotated the screen toward me. The address appeared instantly familiar. For several seconds I simply stared at it. Then my stomach dropped. The location belonged to a commercial building less than 3 blocks from my television studio. That cannot be right, I whispered. I checked it 3 times. My thoughts raced. The building contained dozens of businesses, marketing firms, legal offices, production companies, restaurants. Nothing immediately connected to Claire. Nothing immediately connected to my private life. Then Ethan opened another document. This one listed tenants. My pulse stopped when I recognized a name. Harper Media Consulting. Denise Harper. My publicist. For a moment the room became completely silent. Denise had represented me for nearly 14 years. She knew every major decision I had ever made professionally. She knew where I traveled, who I met, which rumors were true and which were nonsense. More importantly, she knew about Claire. Not every detail, but enough. Far more than most people. There has to be another explanation, I said. Ethan nodded. There probably is. This is not proof. But it was enough to change everything. I spent the rest of the day replaying conversations in my head. Denise encouraging me to keep my private life private. Denise warning me about public scrutiny. Denise insisting that audiences preferred certainty over complexity. None of those statements seemed suspicious when she first made them. Now they felt different. Late that evening my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time there was no photograph. No countdown. Only a sentence. Tell Claire the truth before someone else does. My blood ran cold. Because there was one detail Ethan had not mentioned until after our meeting ended. The latest message had been sent only 11 minutes after my conversation with him. Which meant whoever was watching did not merely know about my relationship. They somehow knew about my investigation. For the first time, fear gave way to something else. Anger. Not because someone had targeted me. Because they had dragged Claire into it. I picked up my phone and opened her contact information. My finger hovered above the call button. 28 hours remained. And I finally understood that keeping her uninformed was no longer protecting her. It was putting her at risk of being blindsided by a truth she deserved to hear from me. 21 hours remained when I finally told Claire everything. We met at her apartment overlooking the river just after sunset. The city glowed beyond the windows, painted in gold and blue reflections that shimmered across the water. Normally I loved that view. That evening I barely noticed it. Claire knew something was wrong the moment she opened the door. "Victoria," she said softly, "you are scaring me." I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. For several seconds I could not find the words. After spending decades speaking to millions of people, I suddenly struggled to speak to the one person who mattered most. Finally, I handed her my phone. She read every message in silence. Every photograph. Every threat. Every countdown. The room felt impossibly quiet except for the faint hum of traffic outside. When she finished, she lowered the phone slowly. I expected anger. Shock. Disappointment. Instead, she looked directly at me and asked a single question. "How long have you been carrying this alone?" The question hit harder than any accusation could have. "Too long," I admitted. Claire moved closer and took my hand. "You should have told me." "I know. Do you think I would have left?" I shook my head immediately. "No, then why?" I stared down at our hands. The answer felt embarrassingly simple. "Because I was afraid." Claire nodded slowly. "Not afraid of them." She glanced toward the phone. "Afraid of what happens if the world knows." I wanted to argue. I wanted to claim the threats were the problem. But we both knew better. The countdown had exposed something I had spent years avoiding. The fear had existed long before the first email arrived. We talked for hours. About the messages. About Denise. About the investigation. About the possibility that everything could become public within a day. At some point after midnight, Claire stood by the window overlooking the river. The city lights reflected in her eyes. "What if they release everything tomorrow?" she asked quietly. I looked at her silhouette against the glass. "Then my life changes forever." She turned toward me. No, her voice was calm. "Certain. Your life changes if you keep letting strangers decide your choices." The words settled heavily in the room. Because deep down I knew she was right. For 6 years I had convinced myself that silence was protection. Yet silence had never brought peace. It had only made fear more comfortable. The next morning I arrived at the studio with less than 10 hours remaining. Producers rushed through hallways carrying schedules and briefing notes. Reporters prepared for interviews. Technicians adjusted lighting and cameras. Everything looked normal. Yet for me, every second felt sharper than usual. Every sound seemed louder. Every moment felt significant. At noon another message arrived. I opened it immediately. There was no photograph this time. No threat. Just one sentence. "Tonight is your last chance." I stared at the words and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because the situation was improving. Because for the first time I knew exactly what I was going to do. By 6 o'clock that evening, millions of viewers would be watching the live broadcast. My producers expected another routine show. The network expected strong ratings. The person behind the messages expected my silence. As I sat in the makeup chair preparing for airtime, I realized that none of them understood something important. The countdown was almost over. But it was ending on my terms. The red light above the main camera turned on at exactly 6 o'clock. For 27 years that light had meant the same thing. Stay composed. Stay professional. Stay in control. But as I looked into the lens that evening, I realized something had changed. For the first time, I was not worried about making a mistake. I was worried about wasting one final opportunity to tell the truth. The opening segment proceeded normally. Headlines, political updates, economic reports. Millions of viewers watched from living rooms, airports, restaurants, and hotel rooms across the country. My producers sat behind the control room glass expecting another routine broadcast. Then we reached the final segment, the one scheduled for a human interest story about community volunteers. Instead of reading the teleprompter, I paused. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. I could almost hear confusion spreading through the control room. Then I spoke. Tonight, I want to talk about something personal. My heart pounded so loudly I could feel it in my throat. Yet strangely I felt calm. More calm than I had felt in days. Maybe because the decision was finally made. For many years I have shared stories about other people. I have asked difficult questions. I have encouraged honesty and courage. But there is a truth about my own life that I have been afraid to share. Somewhere in the studio, producers were undoubtedly panicking. Yet nobody cut the feed. Nobody interrupted. The cameras remained focused on me. Several years ago, I met someone extraordinary. Someone kind, talented, and deeply important to me. Her name is Claire Bennett. Saying her name out loud felt like stepping into sunlight after years indoors. For too long, I convinced myself that privacy and fear were the same thing. They are not. One protects us. The other controls us. My hands stopped trembling. My voice grew stronger. I am proud of the life we have built together. I am proud of who I am. And I am tired of allowing fear to make decisions that belong to me. When I finished, the studio became completely silent. Then the broadcast ended. Just like that. 27 years of carefully managed public image had changed in less than 3 minutes. My phone exploded with notifications before I even left the anchor desk. Messages, emails, news alerts, social media reactions. Some supportive, some critical, some surprised. Exactly as I expected. What surprised me was how little any of it mattered. Outside the building, reporters had already begun gathering near the entrance. Instead of using the private exit, I walked through the main lobby. Claire stood waiting near the front doors. The moment I saw her, everything else faded into the background. The cameras, the headlines, the speculation. None of it seemed important anymore. She smiled the same way she had smiled 6 years earlier in that gallery. Warm, genuine, certain. I walked toward her and took her hand. No hiding, no explanations, no fear. The next few weeks were chaotic. Investigations eventually revealed that Denise had not been responsible after all. The evidence pointed to an outside contractor who had gained access to private scheduling systems years earlier. Arrests were made. Questions were answered. The threat disappeared. But by then, the countdown had already given me something unexpected. Freedom. Months later, ratings remained strong. Some sponsors left. Others stayed. New opportunities appeared. Life moved forward. One evening, Claire and I stood beside Lake Michigan watching the sunset paint the water gold. The wind carried the familiar scent of the lake while waves rolled gently against the shore. Claire slipped her hand into mine. Any regrets? She asked softly. I looked at the horizon and smiled. For the first time in years, the answer came easily. Not anymore.